Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Nia Griffith.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Nia Griffith.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister promised by the end of this Parliament to reduce net annual migration to the UK to tens of thousands. Will that promise be met? Yes or no?
Well, we've made very good steps forward on migration from outside the EU, where it is down by a third and its lowest level since 1998. That is a success, and we've seen net migration overall come down by around a fifth. What we haven't seen is what we saw under Labour, which is 2.2 million people come in net over 10 years. That was unacceptable. We're getting the situation under control.
Tracy Crouch.
Speaking recently with a constituent of mine who has just been diagnosed with dementia, she was understandably incredibly frightened about what the future might hold for her. The dementia strategy has made great progress, but it comes to an end this month. So will the Prime Minister give his personal assurances that a new dementia framework will be put in place as soon as possible to help my constituents and those other people to live well with dementia?
I can certainly give my honourable friend that assurance, and I can add that in terms of our dementia challenge, which is about doubling the research going into dementia and treating it like a disease as cancer or heart disease, that will continue. The work we're doing to make sure that local communities are more dementia friendly, that must continue, and also improving the care that elderly people get in care homes, nursing homes and in hospitals. That vital piece of work must continue as well, and we'll continue to use our position in the G7 to push for this issue globally as well.
Mr. Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, the events of the last week have caused deep concern and anger to the public. What lessons has the Prime Minister learnt from his handling of the situation?
Well, first of all, I agree with him. There is still very deep concern, public concern that is still very raw about the expenses scandal that rocked this Parliament in the last Parliament. And the biggest lesson I learned, that anger is still very raw and it needs to be acted on. I hope the one lesson that won't be learnt, that the right thing to do as soon as someone has to answer allegations is just to instantly remove them rather than give them a chance to clear their name and get on with their job.
Well, I was asking about his handling of the situation and the lessons he learnt, and he had no answer. Now, he wrote in his letter to the Culture Secretary today, and I quote, "I think it is important to be clear that the Committee on Standards cleared you of the unfounded allegations made against you." So can he now explain what, in his view, the Culture Secretary did wrong?
Well, the Culture Secretary has set out the reasons for her resignation in her letter, but he does make an important point, which is the Culture Secretary was accused of a very serious offence, which was, by a Member of Parliament, she was accused of housing her parents at the public expense. Now, she was cleared of that allegation, and I thought it was right. Other people will be able to take their own view. I'm telling you about my view. I thought it was right, in those circumstances, to allow her to make her apology and continue with her job. That is the way I think is the right way to handle it. Now, other people can take their own view. I think if people clear themselves of a serious offence, you let them get on with their job, you let them try to do their job, that is actually the right thing to do.
I've got to say to him, Mr. Speaker, it will be completely unclear to the country why the Culture Secretary is not still in her job, because he thinks she did nothing wrong. Let me explain to him.
Order. This session will be conducted in an orderly way, however long it takes. I happen to know there are children here today observing our proceedings who would like to think the House would show a good example. Let's see if we can. Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, what she did wrong was she refused to cooperate with an inquiry, she breached the Code of Conduct for MPs, and she gave a perfunctory and inadequate apology to this House, as people on all sides have been saying. But he said 6 days ago she had done the right thing and we should leave it at that. Does he now recognise this was a terrible error of judgment?
as I say, I think it was right to allow her the chance to get on with her job. But there is one weakness in the right honourable gentleman's argument. If he thinks this was the case, why didn't he call on her to resign? Right. He seems to be, in my view, the first leader of the opposition, probably in history, to come to this House and make the first suggestion that someone should resign after they've already resigned.
Speaker, I've heard everything. It's my job to fire members of his cabinet. This is about him. This is about him and the fact he still doesn't understand what she did wrong. The reason the public was so appalled was that if it had happened in any other business, there would have been no question about them staying in their job. Why was he the last person in the country to realise her position was untenable?
It's very clear. She did do some things wrong, and that is why she was asked to apologise, and she did apologise. And it wasn't right not to cooperate properly with the committee, and she apologised for that. But I have to say, it is rather extraordinary, the right honourable gentleman now coming here, having not said she should resign, and saying she should have resigned. I think it shows all the signs of someone seeing a political bandwagon and wanting to jump on it. On this bandwagon after the whole circus has left town. But where I agree with the right honourable gentleman is that there is still more that needs to be done to deal with the problems of expenses that we suffered in the last Parliament. Now, we've made some big steps forward. I'm not sure everybody knows this, but any expense complaint from 2010 onwards is now dealt with by an independent body and not dealt with by MPs. That is right. The committee of MPs that does the work on the past cases now has members of the public sitting on it. That is right. But I accept, let us do more to reassure the public about the scandal of expenses and how we're dealing with it. I'm very happy to hold meetings with party leaders, with the authorities of this House. I think it's absolutely right. We should do everything we can to show that this is a good and honest Parliament with good and hard-working people in it. That is the assumption that I start for, and I make no apology for that.
The Prime Minister describes it as a bandwagon and a circus. Let me actually... This is about the members of this country absolutely appalled by the conduct of his government over the last week. That is what it is about. It is about members of the public who cannot understand why he did not act. Now, he said in his foreword to the Ministerial Code, the British people expect the highest standards of conduct. We must not let them down. Does he not realise that his failure, even now his failure to recognise what went wrong, has undermined trust, not only in his government, but in politics?
Well, what we see is absolutely transparent. He came here today determined to play politics in every single way that he could. Absolutely clear. Look, since 2010...
Prime Minister's answer must and will be heard. The Prime Minister.
I think members across this House would know since 2010, since the last Parliament, a lot of changes have been made. Independent members on the Parliamentary Committee, publication of all meetings, visits and gifts for ministers, publication of all special advisor salaries, publication of government spending. But is there more to do? Yes, absolutely there is more to do. And if he's serious about doing it, he will sit down with other party leaders, with the authorities of this House, and let us ask, what can we do to put beyond doubt that this is a good and honest Parliament with hard-working people? Now, if he wants to play politics and he wants a good soundbite on the news, carry on. If you're serious, get serious.
Speaker, I will have meetings with him any time about how we reform the systems of this House. Of course I will, but he just doesn't get it. That is what he has shown today. He needs to learn profound lessons about how he runs his government. The Culture Secretary went, not because of her bad conduct, but because of her bad press. Yeah. He promised in opposition to be an apostle for better standards, and he spent the last week being an apologist for unacceptable behaviour.
I think what this shows if the right honourable gentleman think that it is leadership to fire someone at the first sign of trouble rather than actually giving someone a chance to get on with the job, that is actually not leadership, that is weakness. And if that is his recommendation of leadership, I don't think the country will have any of it.
Mr. Tim Farron.
Speaker, would the Prime Minister agree with me? Would the Prime Minister agree with me? The people living in rural...
Order. It shouldn't be a collective groan. No, it's not. The honourable gentleman is good-humoured. But order! The House will hear the honourable gentleman, Mr. Tim Farron.
That's much better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Prime Minister agree with me that people living in rural Britain have as much right to decent quality and safe healthcare and hospital services as anybody else? And if he does, will he help to intervene directly and help me personally to ensure the Morecambe Bay Hospitals Trust does not downgrade, sell off, offload or close Westmoreland General Hospital in Kendal?
Well, I do. Representing a rural constituency, I know how important it is that people have access to good health services, and I know how important it is we get health and social services to work better together, which is the key to success in so many of our areas. He asked me to look into a specific case, and I'm happy to do that.
Dr. Alistair MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And in the light of this week's historic visit by the Irish President Michael D. Higgins to the UK, building on a legacy of President Mary McAleese and Her Majesty's historic visit to Ireland in 2011, will the Prime Minister agree with me that Anglo-Irish relationships have never been stronger, and that if we're to build lasting reconciliation across these islands, we need the full commitment of his government, along with the Irish government, to ensure that the potential prospects from the Haas process are delivered and implemented?
Well, first of all, can I strongly agree with the honourable gentleman that it is a landmark visit of the Irish President to this country, coming 3 years after the Queen's extraordinary visit to the Republic of Ireland. And I would absolutely agree with him that Anglo-Irish relations are at an all-time high. And the Taoiseach Enda Kenny and I are absolutely committed to building on that relationship, and all the time are thinking of new things that Britain and Ireland can do as good neighbours and good friends. In terms of the Haas talks, I do think it would be good if we could make some progress on that issue. It's something that the parties in Northern Ireland started themselves, and I would urge them to continue it.
Sir Peter Luff.
Mr. Speaker, on the day when BBC Radio 4 Woman's Hour has put the distinguished geneticist Professor Nazneen Rahman at number 3 in their power list, I'm pleased to remind the Prime Minister of his challenge to me to suggest practical policies that could address the damaging and long-standing underrepresentation of women in science and engineering careers. So what is his response to the thoughtful...
The order. The honourable gentleman will be heard. Sir Peter.
The opposition doesn't regard this as a serious matter, Mr. Speaker. I thought they did. So what is his response to the thoughtful report published last week, what I commissioned to meet his challenge through both eyes by the campaign group Science Girl?
Well, can I pay tribute to my right honourable friend for campaigning and working so hard on this issue? It is really important for the future of our country, also, not just for gender equality, but for our economic future, to get more women into STEM subjects and into engineering. I support the National Centre for Universities and Businesses' target of doubling the numbers of female engineering graduates by 2030. We're working with employers, professional bodies and academic institutions to implement the Perkins Review of engineering skills. But I think one of the most powerful things is role models like the role model he mentioned in his question.
Andy Slaughter.
Speaker, did the Prime Minister or any of his staff ask the Right Honourable Member for Basingstoke to resign her position as Culture Secretary, and if not, should he have?
The Right Honourable Member for Basingstoke, my honourable friend, has set out the reasons for her resignation in a letter that she set out today, and I think people should accept that. And I've given the fullest possible answers I could about my attitude of working with colleagues and giving them the chance to get on with their jobs. That's the right approach.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to this government's long-term economic plan, slashed by 42% in my constituency. Does the Prime Minister think that the opening of a new university technical college and a new free sixth form college in Salisbury will enhance the ability of young people in South Wiltshire to compete in the global race?
My honourable friend is entirely right in every word, because what we do see is a decline in youth unemployment. The figures in Salisbury and in the southwest are quite remarkable. The long-term youth claimant count has come down by 37% over the last year. What we need to do to further drive down youth unemployment is make sure the training opportunities and the education is there, and that's why the university technical colleges are so important. Youth unemployment is still too high. When we strip out those that are in full-time education, it's 8.7%. That is much lower than France or Italy or Spain or the EU average, but it's still too high, and we're committed to get it down.
Simon Danchuk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Paul Cowdray, is to lose his home after raising concerns about overcharging by solicitor Michael Sandler. This solicitor from hell found a loophole by which he could sue my constituent for complaining. The Solicitors Regulation Authority describes Sandler as morally reprehensible, but say they are powerless to act. Will the Prime Minister look at this case and intervene to stop solicitors running rings round their regulators?
Well, I'm happy to look into this case. As the honourable gentleman will know, the legal regulators and the legal ombudsman, which were improved over previous years, they are independent of government, so it's not possible to intervene directly, but what I can do excuse me, is arrange for a meeting between him and the Minister for Legal Services to discuss what remedies are open to his constituent, and if that would be helpful, then I'll certainly put that in place.
Mr. Raymond Chishti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif of Pakistan is due to visit the United Kingdom later this month. Will the Prime Minister specifically discuss with him the reform of the blasphemy laws in Pakistan, which are often used to persecute and prosecute minority communities, including the Christian community? And will the Prime Minister urge him to ensure that all those who are prosecuted under these laws get justice, including a British national?
No, I can reassure my honourable friend that I will certainly raise that issue with Prime Minister Sharif when he comes to the United Kingdom. I think it is important in the run-up to Easter to remember how many Christians are still persecuted around the world, including the persecution of Christians under things like the blasphemy laws. So I will raise that. It's an important issue, and I look forward to meeting with the Pakistan leadership.
William Bain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Prime Minister aware that for 3 million low-income families, for every £3 they gain through the higher personal tax allowance, they will lose £2 straight away through universal credit? Isn't the Prime Minister simply giving with one hand, but taking away from low-paid Britain with the other?
I actually think the honourable gentleman is quite profoundly wrong, because the whole point about universal credit is that you will always keep a reasonable share of every extra pound earned. The difference between universal credit and the systems put in place by the last government is that you often faced people with over 100% marginal tax rates effectively when they were in work. That is what universal credit will change, and that's why I thought the party opposite was in favour of universal credit. But if they've changed their mind about that, as they often do about other things, perhaps they should tell us.
James Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The number of apprenticeship starts in my constituency is now at a record high. And next week I'm holding the second Hales Owen in Raleigh Regis apprenticeship fair at St Michael's School in Raleigh Regis. Would the Prime Minister agree with me that investing in apprenticeship and skills is a critical part of our long-term economic plan to give local people in the Black Country the skills they need to get the good quality jobs and to secure their future?
Well, I certainly join my honourable friend in what he says. We've seen 185,000 apprenticeship starts in the West Midlands under this government. We've now got 1.6 million nationwide, so we're on target for 2 million during this Parliament. I want to make sure that we continue to grow apprenticeships and we continue to see an increase in the quality of apprenticeships, and also, crucially, that there's better information for young people in school about deciding the pathway they want to take, whether they want to take an academic pathway through university or they want to look at apprenticeships, and we'll be doing more on this front.
Naomi Long.
Despite all of the progress achieved in Northern Ireland, a recent poll found that 67% of 16 to 24-year-olds think their future lies outside Northern Ireland, with 70% citing their view that local politicians weren't capable of agreeing a shared vision for the future as a factor in that. Does the Prime Minister agree that this ought to act as a wake-up call to those who continue to indulge in the politics of division and fear, to start showing real leadership, to inspire young people and give them hope for a shared and better future in Northern Ireland?
Well, can I pay tribute to the Honourable Lady for the work that she does on this front? Anyone who believes that change isn't possible, or that politicians can't rise to a challenge in Northern Ireland, I think would have been very struck, as I was, by seeing Martin McGuinness around the table at Windsor Castle toasting the Queen last night at that banquet celebrating British-Irish relations. People have come a huge way, and we need to continue with that vital work, including the work to fight racism and sectarianism wherever it arises. Above all, what we need is politicians in Northern Ireland to build a shared future, to take down those peace walls, to make sure that the economy can grow and opportunities are there for everyone in Northern Ireland.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 35,000 runners in last year's London Marathon raised £53 million for good causes. I'll be running again this Sunday for the Forget-Me-Not Children's Hospice in Huddersfield. Will the Prime Minister join me in wishing all the runners good luck, including a record contingent from this House, including the Children's Minister and the Shadow Chancellor?
Over the cornflakes this morning, I saw a very attractive picture of my honourable friend in his shorts and the Shadow Chancellor in a curious pair of black leggings. And I know that a number of colleagues in this House, I have to say, I bow down to you in my bravery. 26 miles is a very long way to go. I certainly couldn't manage it, but I'm full of admiration, and full of admiration for the money that you will raise for excellent causes, and I pay tribute to all members on all sides of the House that are taking part.
Emma Lewell-Buck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Sue Martin, suffers from ME and has been waiting over 9 months for her personal independence claim to be processed. She now has to borrow from her 84-year-old mother just to get by. Why does the Prime Minister think this is acceptable?
Look, all delays in these sorts of payments aren't acceptable, and we have to make sure the benefits are paid on time. What we're trying to do with the personal independence payment is actually to introduce it gradually so we make sure the quality of decision-making is good.
Michael Thornton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, I was privileged to meet Walter Kamerling, a Holocaust survivor. Is the Prime Minister aware of another appalling persecution occurring today? That is the ethnic cleansing of the Hazara community in Afghanistan and Pakistan. A gentle, religious, Islamic tolerant people who educate their sons and their daughters. Would he meet with the member of the APPG concerned with this, ably chaired by the Honourable Member for Southampton Test, to discuss this situation?
Well, we should be absolutely clear that the Afghanistan that we have been supporting and will continue to support must be a multiracial and multi-ethnic Afghanistan. That includes Pashtuns, Hazaras, Tajiks, Uzbeks and the many nationalities that make up that country. It's absolutely vital for its future. I'm very happy to look at the evidence that he has and perhaps arrange any appropriate meetings.
Paul Flynn.
2,400 jobs have been destroyed in Leicester, Corby, and last Friday 650 in Newport by one single firm that specialises in cynically buying up firms, degrading the pay and conditions of their staff and then abandoning them to unemployment. What protection is the government planning to give to those blameless people, hard workers, who suffer from the scourge of this new vulture capitalism?
Well, I'm very happy to look at the individual case that he raises, but what I would say about the situation in terms of jobs in the UK right now, if you look at the last week, we've had 8,000 jobs from Birmingham City Airport, we've had 12,000 jobs from Asda, over 1,000 jobs from Vodafone. What we're seeing is businesses wanting to locate in Britain, take people on in Britain and grow in Britain. But if he has an example of bad practice, I'm very happy to look at it.
Mark Pritchard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 1967, the abortion term limit was set at 28 weeks. In 1990, this was reduced to 24 weeks. Given it is now 2014, a quarter of a century onwards, and given recent breakthroughs in antenatal and neonatal care, does the Prime Minister agree with me it is now time to reduce the abortion term limit to 22 weeks?
Well, I've always made my own personal views on this clear, and there have been opportunities recently in Parliament to vote on this issue. It is always open to members of Parliament to bring forward legislation, to amend existing bills, and for the House to debate this. And that's happened relatively recently, but to continue on this side, as I'm sure on the other side, to be an entirely free vote issue.
Jenny Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Did the Prime Minister or any member of his cabinet ask the member for Basingstoke to resign?
My right honourable friend, the member for Basingstoke, took her own decision and has communicated that decision in a letter. And I really think members opposite should respect that decision.
Mr. Nigel Adams.
A cloud hangs over the job prospects of 700 mine workers in my constituency at Kellingley Colliery. Can the Prime Minister assure the House that this government is doing everything it can to ensure the future for that pit and also those men's and women's livelihoods?
I can give my honourable friend that assurance. I think it is important that despite the difficulties UK coal faces, that the government should do everything it can within the rules that are laid down to look at whether there's help and assistance that we can give. And that's exactly what is happening. I'm being kept up to date with this on sometimes a daily basis, and I can assure him it's getting the government's attention.
Mr. Mike Weir.
In the spirit of the new positive case for the Union previewed this week by Lord Robertson, can the Prime Minister perhaps give us his view as to which of the fourth horsemen of the apocalypse will be first to descend upon an independent Scotland?
My view is an entirely positive one about what this United Kingdom has achieved together in the past and what we can achieve in the future. I think the ones that take a narrow, inward-looking, rather selfish view about the future are sitting on the benches over there.
Alan Cairns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Surgeon General of the Armed Forces has raised concerns of the impact of longer NHS waiting times on soldiers based in Wales. Does the Prime Minister agree that NHS outcomes for my constituents, including soldiers, are simply not good enough, that the Welsh Government could be undermining the operations of the armed forces and are potentially in breach of the military covenant?
I think my honourable friend makes an important point. We've seen an 8% cut to the budget in Wales, to the NHS. The last time A&E targets were met was 2009. The last time cancer treatment targets were met was 2008. Over a third of people miss out on access to diagnostic services within 8 weeks. There is a truly dreadful record when it comes to Labour's NHS in Wales. And you see a huge contrast now with the NHS in England, properly funded, well run, meeting the key targets, and the shambles there is in Wales.
David Lammy.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. 5 years ago, in one of the worst scenes since the Good Friday agreement, my constituent sapper Patrick Azenkar and his colleague Mark Quincy were shot and killed outside their barracks in County Antrim. Their families still await justice. Will the Prime Minister look at this case and also into the use of diplock trials in Northern Ireland?
Well, first of all, can I take this opportunity to express my sympathy to the families of sappers Azimkar and Quincy. This was a despicable terrorist attack, and I fully share the desire that the perpetrators are brought to justice. Just because we are trying to deal with the legacies of the past does not mean that crimes that have been committed should not be properly prosecuted and those responsible convicted. I know my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, met the sappers' parents to discuss their concerns. The diplock trial system in Northern Ireland was abolished in 2007 and replaced by provisions allowing non-jury trials only in specific sets of circumstances. These provisions lapse every 2 years, and consideration will be given to whether they ought to be renewed for a further 2 years in 2015.
Mr. Jake Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People in Rossendale and Darwin would have been reassured this week to see the IMF upgrade the country's growth forecast. However, would my right honourable friend agree that they would be more reassured to know that our long-term economic plan is working in East Lancashire by the announcement this week by Red Rose Drylining that they'd also created 30 new apprenticeships?
I think my honourable friend makes an important point. When we look at what has been happening in Britain this week, we can see the IMF saying that the UK will grow fastest for any G7 country. The extra jobs at Asda, Birmingham, Vodafone, the extra apprenticeships he talks about in East Lancashire, the trade deficit is falling, employment is rising, Britain is on its way back.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the committee stage of the Legal Aid Punishment Offenders Act, the Minister assured the committee that those who were refused legal aid could still apply under the new exceptional funding scheme. He said, the Minister, that this was a vital safeguard. From April to December 2013, 617 family law applications have been made and 8 have been allowed. What kind of safeguard is that?
I will look very closely at the cases that he raises, but the key thing is this, that we have to make sure our legal aid system is affordable, and when we compare our legal aid system with similar common law countries, we still spend far more per head than countries like Australia or New Zealand or others. He shakes his head, but frankly, it's no good for members of Parliament to come to Parliament every week and vote against every single spending decision, but not to recognise we have to get our deficit down in order to help our economy recover.
David Nuttall. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister take a few minutes over the Easter recess to read at least the winning entry in the Institute of Economic Affairs' Brexit competition, which was announced last night? Because if he does, I am sure it will give my right honourable friend some good ideas as to why leaving the European Union should become part of our long-term economic plan.
Well, my honourable friend and I agree on many things, but I'm afraid this isn't one of it. What isn't one of them? I'll happily look at the Institute of Economic Affairs pamphlet as a potential piece of holiday reading and see how it competes with other alternatives. Perhaps the novel of my honourable friend, the member for Mid-Bedfordshire. That is obviously another choice for this festive period.
Order.